Can people see the source sheet? Yes?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So I called it Revisiting the Nature of Power, Miriam's Watery Leadership. And hopefully you'll see what I mean. And we're starting with our Parsha, and then we're going to go backwards and see what we can learn from other texts and how they shed light on Parshat Chukat. Okay, so starting in Numbers 20 with the death of Miriam. Vayavo Bnei Yisrael kol ha'ida midbar sin hachodesh harishon vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh v'tamat sham Miriam v'tikaver sham. Hold on one second. Jeff, could you actually shut off the air conditioner? It's very noisy. I don't think I need it. Thank you so much. So the Israelites arrived, I love this, in a body. So I think they're saying the translation is in a body because of kol ha'ida, the entire community, which is interesting and I think not incidental. I think it reflects who Miriam is, one who's a great reconnector, right? Connecting Moses to his mother in Exodus 2 when we first meet Miriam, connecting the women to the rest of the people when they pass through the Reed Sea and Miriam gathers the women in song and dance. And some commentary says that even when Miriam was saying Lashon Hara, was saying sort of, negative things about Moshe's leadership in Numbers 12, I think it is, the rabbis say that she was actually concerned about Moses' marriage, right? Wanting to reconnect him and his wife. So one could, and I could go on, one could say, given all these incidents, that there's something about Miriam that, brings people together. And when she had Sarat, when she was punished with Sarat, which is incorrectly translated as leprosy and was some kind of ancient skin affliction, the whole community waited for her for 7 days. And so the community was devoted to her. Okay, so let's see what happens. So she dies. So that's also interesting, that the people were settled in a place called Kadesh, which means, Kadosh, which is a sanctified place, which perhaps the place that Miriam dies is holy by virtue of her death.
Morning.
Good morning. 3, 4. Did you start? I did.
We were locked.
We're locked out. Oh, so sorry. The in-person people were locked out of the building. Oh, yeah. I was wondering why there were no people here. Yeah. Okay. Shh. Everybody's gathered here. There's some source sheets. Shabbat Shalom. All we did was say Miriam died in our Parsha, and this is where she died, okay? In a place called Kadesh. But Tamat Sham Miriam, and Miriam died there, and she was buried there. And the next thing we know, right, there's no grieving, there's no nothing. When Aaron dies, there's grieving. When Moshe died, there's grieving. No grieving here. Below haya ma'im la'edah, vayikahalu al Moshe ve'al Aharon. So there was no water for the community or for the congregation. And the people gathered against, and it's a very intensive form of the verb gather. So they gathered against Moshe and Aaron. Vayarev ha'am Moshe, and they fought with Moshe. Vayamru le'mor v'lu gavanu b'gvah achenu l'fnei. Only we had perished, if only we had died when our brothers died at the instance of Adonai. Meaning, when in the great sort of punishment around the spies and the loss of faith of Bnei Yisrael. So they're saying like, oh, why don't we die then? Or maybe they're talking about Korach's death and that whole punishment. Who knows? One of the massive plagues and death in the recent Parshiot. Okay, so now we're going to Rashi. Below Haya Ma'im le'edah, and there was no water for the congregation. So Rashi is like wondering, along with the rest of us, Miriam died and no water. What's going on? Mikan shekol arba'in shana haya lehem ha'be'er b'zchut Miriam. Since this statement follows immediately after the mention of Miriam's death, in other words, the connection between Miriam's death and no water, we may learn from it that during the entire 40 years they had the well through Miriam's merit. Okay, so what is this well through Miriam's merit, and why does Miriam merit a well? So Rabbeinu Bachya explains that. I don't know if there's enough source sheets for everybody, so if there aren't, just please share. Okay, so V'lo haya mayim le'eda. Kasheneta Miriam nistalek habe'er, ki haya habe'er b'zchut Miriam. So when Miriam died, the well was removed, so to speak, because the well was in the merit of Miriam. Shehaya la zchut hamayim mimoshe. She had the merit of water from Moshe. So where is this? What's the source of this? What's the proof text? Emar, the Teitatzav achoto miracho. So Rabbeinu Bachya is going backwards to Exodus 2 and talking about when Miriam stationed herself at a distance to see what would happen to her brother and basically save Moshe's life when the daughter of Pharaoh came. V'ma shenistalek ata, the mitata. Because it just disappeared now with her death, Israel realized that it was with them, that it was with them through her merit. And from here we can infer that the well was with them the whole 40 years of their wandering. Okay, so you see there are lots of commentators who are connecting the death of Miriam and the loss of water. And this also makes sense literally because every single time Miriam is mentioned in the Torah, in the 5 books of Moshe, there's some iteration of water in that same passage, right? Even when she speaks Lashon Hara against Moshe, she says negative things about Moshe along with Aaron, God says something like, I forget exactly, but is she my daughter that I would spit on her? So there's a negative instance of water there. And in every other passage, some kind of water is mentioned, like in Exodus 15, right here. So here, the people have just moved through the Red Sea. And with Moshe, the people sing, and then Miriam picks up her timbrel. Vatikach Miriam Haniviyah, Achot Aaron, et hatoch. Then Miriam, the prophet, Aaron's sister, picked up a hand drum, and all the women, and all the women went after her and danced with hand drums. So this is after Moses and Bnei Israel sing the song, and one can presume, since Miriam sort of, had the women join along with the rest of the community, that the men were singing with Moshe, and then Miriam connected the women to the whole community. And Miriam chanted for them, Ta'an lahem Miriam, and Miriam responded to them. Shir l'Adonai ga'o ga'a susfarocho b'ma. Sing to Adonai, for he has triumphed gloriously, horse and driver, God has hurled into the sea. So this is echoing the words that Moshe uttered at the beginning of the song. But it's interesting that for Moshe, it says, Ashir l'Adonai, like I will sing to you. And Miriam is responsive. The ta'an lahem Miriam. Miriam responds to the community. Okay. So then let's see what happens. So immediately after this, Vayisa Moshe Yisrael miyam suf yatzu el midbar shur v'yelchu shloshet yamim b'midbar v'lo matzu mayim. So as soon as the people are on the other side of the sea and they're done celebrating, what happens? No water, right? That's the first thing that happens. Vayavo marata. So this passage is really interesting because there's all kinds of alliteration of Miriam's name, right? Miriam, translated as bitter water. And then the people come to the bitter place, Vayavo marata. V'lo yachlu l'shtot mayim mimara. And they could not drink water because of how bitter it was. But you hear the alliteration, it's almost incantatory, if that's a word. Marata. Mayim mimara, himarim ha'em, because they are bitter. Again, kila shema mara. And for this, her name, meaning I guess the place name, is named Mara, right? But one could almost hear like, oh, is that Miriam's nickname? The bitter one. Who knows? Vayilonu ha'am. So here they start their long trajectory and trope of complaint in the Torah. Vayilonu ha'am al Moshe. And the people are complaining, and they're lemur, manishte, what are we going to drink? Okay, so we don't blame them. It's a desert. They're in the wilderness. They just reached freedom. They don't have water. What are we going to drink, right? So they're flipping out a little bit. Like it's Ak El Adonai. So Moshe yells out to God, Vayorehu Adonai eats. And God showed him a tree, Vayishlech El Hamayim. And Moshe threw it into the water. Vayimteku Hamayim. And the water was sweetened. So we have all that bitterness, and now we have sweet. Sham sam lo chok mishpat v'sham misahu. Okay. There God made them the fixed rule. There they were put to the test. 26. Kafa bayomer im shamoa tishma lekol Adonai Elohecha. So if you listen to the voice of God, and what is straight in God's eyes, you do the ha'azanta mitzvotav, and you listen to the mitzvot, the commandments of Adonai, the shamarta kol chukad, and you observe all the chukim, the laws. Kol this is really interesting. Kol hamachala asher samti b'mitzrayim lo asim alacha. All the illness that I put upon in Egypt, doesn't say on who. Lo asim alacha. I won't put upon you. Ki ani Adonai because I, Adonai, am your healer. Right? What a beautiful image of who God is, and it's all tied to Shamoa Tishma. Right, all this listening, Shamoa Tishma Ba'azanta, and then so listening, and then hearing, and then guarding. So if you do all that, you're not going to suffer the way people suffered in Mitzrayim. You're not going to have that kind of illness. Okay, so then by the end of this passage, Vayavo Elima, B'Sham Shtei Mesrei Einot Mayim B'Shivim Smarim V'Chanu Sham Ahamayim. They came to Elim where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there beside the water. What a beautiful image, right? So that's the sort of abundant image of water at the end of that passage. And the other thing to note here is that, many say that the Israelites passing through the Red Sea was as if a baby, right? Baby Israel was born. Right, the child of God, the nation of God was born at that moment. And so as soon as they get to the other side, they're like an infant crying, wow, I'm thirsty, right? So, and then they continue crying through the wilderness. And this is the story of God and Moshe trying to raise them up. Okay, I see a couple of hands, but I'm going to do one more passage, and then we're going to get to our parsha, but before we get to our parsha, stop at this. I'm going to take comments. Okay. So this is the second water crisis, and one could say, and I heard someone say this, although I don't know the source, that right after this, Miriam's well appears. And why do I say that? Because from here until our parsha, which is about 38 years, no more grumbling about water. They grumble about the food and about the meat, about the leadership, right? About the manna, about the land they're supposed to go into. They don't grumble about water until Miriam dies. So midrashically, the fact that the rabbis construct a well makes perfect sense literally. Okay, and that it's associated with Miriam. Okay, so here in Exodus 17, Vayisru kol adat b'nei Yisrael midbar sin l'mas'ehem al pi Adonai v'chanu b'refudim ve'ein mayim l'shtot ha'am. In the wilderness of sin, the whole Israelite community by stages, as Adonai would command, they encamped at Refudim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Vayarev ha'am, and the people quarreled with Moshe. Moshe, Vayamru, Tnu lanu mayim v'nishteh, give us water and we will drink. Vayomer lahem Moshe, and Moshe said to them, Ma teribun imadi, why are you fighting with me? Ma tinasun et Adonai, why are you testing Adonai? Vaitzma sham ha'am lamayim, and the people were thirsty for water. Vayalen ha'am al Moshe, and the people grumbled against Moshe, so they were still complaining. Vayomer, lama zel hitanu mitzrayim, why'd you bring us out of Egypt? And this is an ongoing form of the complaint. Why'd you take us out of Egypt? Let's go back to Egypt. We had it better in Egypt. Lahamit oti, to kill me, the et banai and my children, the et mitnai and my animals, bitsama, with thirst. Vayitzak Moshe Adonai, and Moses yelled at Adonai, Lemor, saying, Ma e'esel am hazeh, what should I do with this nation? Od ma'at uskaluni, in a minute they're going to stone me. Vayomer Adonai Moshe, Avor lefnei ha'am v'kach miziknei Yisrael matcha asher hikata bo et hayor kach b'yadcha v'halachta. Okay, so what I want to do now is pay really close attention to what's happening with Moshe's staff. And the reason I say this is because I want to understand why Moshe hit the rock in Numbers 20, but not here. I mean, no, Moshe does hit the rock here, but God instructs him to hit the rock here. So Adonai said to Moshe, go before the for the nation, and take from the elders of Israel, and take your staff that you used to hit the reed sea, Hayor, take it in your hand and go. Okay, so 6. So it's a very explicit instruction about the staff. Take that staff and a little bit about the history of the staff, right? Hineni omed lefanecha sham al hatzur b'chorev v'hikita batzur v'yatz'u mimenu mayim v'shata ha'am v'ya'as ken Moshe le'enei ziknei Yisrael. Okay, so 6, I will be standing there before you on the rock at Chorev. Strike the rock, and water will issue from it, and the people will drink. And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel. Interesting that the elders are not the rest of Bnei Israel, right? In the sight of will also become important in Numbers 20. So Vayikra hamakom Masa u'Meribah, the place was named Masa and Meribah because the Israelite Ba'al Nosata et Adonai. I'm sorry, read Bnei Yisrael Ba'al Nosata et Adonai. Because the Israelites quarreled because they tried Adonai, saying, Lemur hayesh Adonai b'shemteinu yimchayim, is God present among us or not? So what the Torah is telling us is that behind this crisis of water is a crisis of connection to Adonai. Is Adonai with us? Do we feel God? Do we sense God? You know, there's this anxiety. So if there's an anxiety about whether God's with us, there's an anxiety about water because who's going to provide water for us? Who's going to take care of us? Okay, so there's one hand. Okay, I'm going to stop my share. There's one hand in the room, and as far as I can see, there's one hand on Zoom. I'm going to ask people, as usual, to be concise so we can do more text and hear from more people. Okay, Tony, can you come here, Tony? Because I think otherwise people are not going to hear you. Sorry to put you on the spot.
No worries.
Okay.
I'm happy to be put on the spot.
Okay. Okay. So
I'm
Tony,
an entertainer.
okay, great. Tony, what do you want to say?
You've given us a lot to talk about, so I'm going to try to keep it simple.
Okay, good.
I'm going to try.
No promises.
No promise.
You're going to test me.
So first of all, perhaps one of the reasons we're in the hot water we're in now is because back when, in literal and mythic time, Moses, our leader, kvetched too much about our kvetching. Like, hey, get a grip. listen to our complaints and be a real leader. That's number one.
Okay, so Moshe didn't do a good job as a listener. you're saying.
Well, he didn't do a perfect job. So, and he's not human, and he's not God.
Moshe was
So,
not a therapist.
You could read it by Yitzhak's lap.
what's that?
Like
But
Yitzhak.
Yitzhak,
Yeah. Oh, well.
sorry.
But Moses was always a reluctant leader. He never saw it. He was always reluctant to be the leader. So that's probably the reason why he was not so good at it.
Okay,
So
so
Wendy was saying that Moshe was an ambivalent leader,
amen.
and with Bnei Israel, with the Israelites, I would be an ambivalent leader too.
By the way, with the world as it is then, now, and in the future,
Yeah,
what leader wouldn't be ambivalent?
exactly.
By Donald Trump.
Okay, so go ahead, Tony.
So fast forward.
Fast forward.
By the way, we had a whole discussion here. It wasn't all me. Let's be clear. You can't.
Okay,
last-
go. Just finish. Just go.
It's Shabbat. I'm not going to be rushed.
Oh, yeah, big for you.
Okay, fast forward to 3 moments, and I'll just put those moments out there. Hamlet. The time is out of joint, oh cursed spite that ever I was born to set it right. The reluctant Messiah. A. B. The not so reluctant Messiah, Jesus, who said on the cross, I thirst.
And God, and why have you forsaken me?
And
My
why?
God, my
Yes,
God.
yes.
Nice, nice.
I thirst, and why have you
Nice,
forsaken me?
nice.
Boom.
Okay, go.
And last but not least, in that great Disney animated movie,
The Prince of
100
Egypt.
101 Dalmatians.
Oh,
Mommy, I'm hungry. I'm hungry, mommy.
Tony, I love your erudition. Thank you. Okay,
What
Amy.
you don't know about me is I.
sorry.
No, I'm gonna say.
Amy,
Yeah.
I mean, we're up
I
there.
wrote a
Come on, no,
book
Tony,
called-
it's not right.
Okay. Fine.
Amy,
Okay, I promise to be concise, as always.
thank you.
I want to make 2 very brief points. One is that when Miriam died, the well went into the Jordan River, flowed down the Jordan River, and then went into the Sea of Galilee, or the Kinneret, as we call it. One might think that's a little strange. My husband, the engineer, said you can't have a well in a lake, but there are whirlpools in the Kinneret, and that might give people pause to think that it was that there was a well there. What does happen though is annually on Miriam's yard site, women go out in a big boat with drums and timbrels and scarves, and they go out looking for Miriam's well annually on her yard site, and dancing and singing, and it's quite an experience. I would entreat you, if you're ever in Israel at that time, it's a wonderful, wonderful activity. Okay, and then I want to make a second brief point.
Wait, when's the yurt site? When is the yurt site?
Around now, because Aaron died in like August.
Okay, don't worry, go ahead.
I don't know the exact date, but I think it's in the
It's
spring.
Nissan. I think it's Nissan 8. I was literally just looking this up for Jay. Because she died a year to the day before crossing into Israel.
Cool.
Also, as a side note, I have to run as a moderator, so I'm going to put it on speaker view because we're having some tech things in the services, but have a lovely rest.
Okay.
Open
Okay.
book, everyone, and I'm sorry.
Okay, my second point is also brief. On Aaron's death, Rashi notes that Aaron's death, and this is from Onkelos, notes that Aaron's death is described as occurring alpi, literally by the mouth of the Lord, which he takes literally and anthropomorphically. God killed Aaron with a kiss, and we know that he also took Moses with a kiss. And Rashi contends that Miriam also died with a divine kiss, but asks why scripture fails to mention it. He supposes that it's inappropriate for the Torah to describe God as kissing a woman.
Love
That's
that. Thank
assuming
you
that
so
God
much,
is a
Amy.
man. That's
Love-
assuming that God is a man.
Yeah.
Well, it is,
And not
that
a
is the
mentor.
assumption, isn't it?
Okay.
Well, I thought that concept might make the gay community very happy, though.
Thank you. All right, thank you. Okay, Beth and Jay. Beth and Jay.
Shabbat shalom.
Beth on.
Going back to the analogy of the people being birthed,
Yeah.
it isn't any wonder that Moshe and Miriam both would be getting a little cranky. They're dealing with a newborn, so they're not getting enough sleep at night. They've got this crying, wailing baby. And, no matter how much they love the crying, wailing baby, they're exhausted.
Yeah, who's not ambivalent in those months?
So who's going to be perfect in these circumstances?
Absolutely.
Like, nobody. And so anyway, it's
Great point.
interesting. It's interesting that Miriam won't give Moshe a break. She's criticizing him. And then God's not giving Moshe a break later on. And it's like, here they are, they're dealing, what, God never had a baby, God's self? It's just like, okay, Debarty.
Well, God maybe didn't have a baby before this. This is God's firstborn. Okay, thank you. That's a really important point. Jay.
Whose baby? Who and what baby are we talking about?
We're talking.
Bnei Israel.
Oh,
Okay, we're talking about Bnei Israel as God's child, and the and Yetziat Mitzrayim, the going through the sea as the birth. Okay, Jay.
Just to point out that if the well took that route flowing to the Kinneret, it would have been going upstream the whole way. But
Right.
as the first prime minister of Israel said, we've always depended on miracles.
the Jordan flows down into the Kinneret. It doesn't go
No,
up.
no, it flows down to the Dead Sea.
No.
Okay, we're going on. Have this
Then
conversation.
they're done, that goes down.
Amy, Jay, in the chat. Thank you. Okay. What an unruly.
Could you, if you open the
I
chat,
feel a
that would be
little bit like
awesome.
Moshe.
Here's the
Oh,
Kinneret.
open
and
the
here's
chat.
Jordan.
Oh my God.
That isn't open.
Anna, you're not here anymore?
She opened it. It's open now.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Okay, now we're digging into our Parsha. Finally, Numbers 20. So now this is, as Rabbi David would say, incredibly juicy. In terms of Miriam and Moshe, and as you recall, we saw the first few verses where Miriam dies and there's no water. So there's the continuation of that, of text 1 at the top of the page. Okay, the Lama Havetem et Kahal Adonai Elhem Midbar. And why have you brought Adonai's congregation into this wilderness for us and our beasts to die? Elhem Midbar Hazel Lamut Sham Anachnu U'Ve'irenu. The Lama Ha'elitanu Mitzrayim. And why did you make us leave Egypt? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt? That's like the killer and the kicker, because this whole enterprise is all about God liberating the Israelites from Egypt to bring them to the promised land. So it's as if the Israelites are challenging and negating the very premise of this whole story, right? Lahavir otanu el hamakom hara, to bring us to this bad place. Lo makom zera te'ena. It is not a place of growth and figs, the geffen and grapes, the rimon, pomegranates, umayim ayin lishtod, and there's no water to drink.
Diane, can you put the sheet up, please? Can you put the sheet up so we can see it?
You can't see it?
No.
Stop sharing the screen.
I'm so sorry. So I can see it. I assumed you would see. That's a problem, isn't it? To assume that other people can see what's in my head. Okay. Okay. Can you see it now? Yes?
Yes, thank you.
So sorry about that, David. Thank you. We're so sorry about that. Everybody, thank you, David. Okay. Okay, so what happens? Verse 6. Vayavo Moshe v'Aaron b'fnei hakahal al petach ohel moed vayiplu al pneihem. Sorry, I'm just trying to see. Vayirach kibod Adonai alehem. Moses and Aaron came away from the congregation to the entrance of the tent of meeting and fell on their faces, as Moses and Aaron often do before the complaint of the Israelites. I thought that was funny.
How many times did they break their nose?
The presence of Adonai appeared to them. Adonai Moshe lemor. So God says to Moshe, saying, okay, so now let's pay close attention Compared to Exodus 17, what does God say to Moshe here? Kach et hamateh, take your staff. V'hakel et ha'edah, atah v'Aaron achicha, and gather the community, right? You and Aaron, your brother. V'dibartem el hasela le'eineihem, and speak to the rock before their eyes. So before their eyes is really important here. V'natan meimav, so speak to the rock. Do nothing with the staff. Speak to the rock, and it will give you its water. And it's interesting, but Natan me, it's not, and it will give you water. It says, and it will give you its water. Like there's something about the rock that's a little bit animated. The Natan me ma.
It's also a different word for rock.
Yes, right. There was Sur and here was Sela. Good one.
I don't know what.
Good. I don't know what the difference is either, but good noticing. The Hotzeta lehem mayim min hasela, and you will take water from the rock. And you will, so to speak, water the congregation and their animals. And Moshe takes the staff from before God, just the way God instructed or commanded. And they gather together the kahal, the community. And you see the verb is a verb of the noun kahal, by yakilu and kahal. El pnei hasela, before the face or before the rock. By yomer lahem. Okay, and I talked about this last night, so sorry for those of you who were there. But I think it's worth repeating. Moshe says, Shimu na hamorim. Listen now, you rebels. So you've never heard Moshe insult Bnei Israel before. Moshe is insulting the Israelites. Moshe is enraged, right? Usually Moshe is the one who talks God down from God's rage. And Moshe is the one who tries to sort of, soften God's rage. But here, Moshe is the one who's enraged. Hamin hasela hazeh notzi lachem mayim. Is it from this rock that we will get for you water? So what's this rage? So if we look carefully at this word morim, and you consider what it would look like unvocalized, and know that the Torah is written in an unvocalized way, right? There are no vowels. We see Shemuna HaMiriam, right? Moshe is reaching out to Miriam, calling for Miriam, right? And saying, from this rock, shall we, him and Miriam, perhaps, get you water? So there's perhaps a double way to read this. One is the rage at God's people, and the other is the rage. Maybe they skipped over the grief and Moshe went directly to rage for the fact that his sister abandoned him. Like the sister that saved him originally from the killing force of the Pharaoh. Right? This whole story is because of Miriam. It would not have happened without Miriam. And now she's gone. Right? So this is Moshe missing his sister. Vayarem Moshe et yado vayach et hatzela. So Moshe raised his hand and hit the rock. B'matehu pamayim. Not only once, but twice. With his staff, hit the rock twice. So again, more evidence of Moshe's rage. A lot of water came out, and it watered the congregation and their animals. Okay, so let's just think for a moment about Moshe and hitting. So remember, when we first meet Moshe, not as an infant, but as an adult, he comes from the palace, and he kills an Egyptian slave master.
By striking him.
What?
By striking
By
him.
striking him, striking him. Then Moshe at the burning bush, God tells him, throw the staff down on the floor, it will become a snake. Right? So there's all this stuff, like, Moshe is used to doing with the staff. Then, stretch your staff out over the Nile and it'll become blood. Lots of stuff with the staff and the stick. So the staff and the plague, right? And it's the makot, it's the hitting. The plagues are literally hitting. And then Moshe, stretches out his mateh, his staff over the Reed Sea, and it splits. So he's not used to not doing anything with the staff. Right here, he's supposed to take the staff, speak. Right? It's an evolution from Exodus 17, where he takes the staff and he's supposed to hit the rock, because Moshe and Bnei Israel are in a different point now in terms of their evolution. It shouldn't be anymore about the staff. It should be about language. And in fact, we're moving into Deuteronomy, where it's all about language. It's all about Moshe's retelling the story, right? We have 4 books of the Torah, where we are told the story and everything through the voice of the omniscient narrator. And the 5th book of the Bible is in the human voice, in Moshe's voice, right? So we're heading towards language. We're heading towards the power of language, in our unfolding tradition. Wow. And here, inappropriately, Moshe hits. And yet, appropriately, because he's missing his sister and he's enraged. One can really understand that. Okay, Robin.
But he's also, in the point of missing his sister, he's like regressing to the moment where like he can't speak, and Aharon is next to him, and Aharon should have spoken. Like Aharon should say, Moshe, what are you doing? Like you're supposed let me speak. Yeah. Instead all that and his childishness and
he's acting out.
So Robin's saying something really beautiful. So at this moment, Moshe's really, I got to handle the hybrid to make sure that everyone hears everything. So Moshe's regressing to the point where he can't use language. And Robin's saying, Aaron was appointed to be Moshe's mouthpiece. Why isn't he speaking? And I would say, Robin, because he lost his sister too. They're both grieving, right? What happens when you grieve? You have no words. Vayidom Aharon, right? And Moshe and Aaron was silent. And so here too, Aaron was silent. Wow. Okay, so let's see what happens. 12. Vayomer Adonai Moshe Aaron.
His 2 sons also.
Ya'an lo ha'manten bi lahaktisheni l'einei bnei Israel. Lachen lo taviu et ha'kahal hazeh el ha'aretz asher natati lahem. Ouch. So Adonai said to Moshe Aaron, because you have not believed in me to sanctify me before the eyes of Bnei Israel, for this, I will not, therefore you shall not, got it. You shall not bring this or lead this congregation to the land that I have given them. So this is the terrible, terrible consequence of hitting the rock instead of speaking to it. You're not going to the promised land, that's it, right? You're not going. I think you perhaps, one could say, God is saying, you don't have that consciousness. You don't have what it takes to go into the next stage of development of this community and who they need to be in the promised land. Wow. But let me just say something else. And this I learned from my Chavrita this morning. I don't know if she's still here, Rabbi Sharon from Annisfeld. She said, this makes me a little, want to cry a little bit. Because you didn't believe in me, I don't exactly know how this goes, but to say Kaddish, right? Because maybe there was no room for the grief of Miriam, right? They didn't stay, they didn't stop, they didn't say Kaddish, they didn't say Shiva, so perhaps where the grief happened was in the rage, right? It's sort of grief inverted.
But they stopped to mourn Aaron's death.
They stopped to mourn and Moshe.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
But not Miriam.
Yeah, but not Miriam. Exactly.
Why is that now?
Well, there was a water crisis.
Also.
Also what?
Well.
Gender. Yeah. So Robin's saying, she's just a woman. But they did stop and wait for her for 7 days when she was sick.
She could still bring
By the
water.
way, it's a lot easier
No.
born father than mother.
The Torah never addresses how the Bnei Israel got water while she was outside the camp with leprosy, with Sarai.
Let me just go on with this, and we have some hands. I think I don't think I'm gonna take that on right now. I have some thoughts that I'll talk to you about later.
Okay.
Hema me meriva asher ravu b'nei Israel Adonai v'yikadesh bam. Those are the waters of Merivah, meaning the Israelites called to Adonai, whose sanctity was affirmed through them. So that's interesting. right? These are the waters Meribah, right? Named for Israelite fighting with God. But nevertheless, God's sanctity was affirmed through them. But how? That's really interesting and confusing to me. Okay, so we have 4 hands. Jay, I'm not taking 5 hands. Jay, I'm not taking double. I'm really sorry because I want to get to at least one, and I welcome you to put your comments in chat. And 1 hand in the room. Okay, so Jessica, Margot, Nehemia, and I will attribute it out. So I'm going to ask everybody to be concise. So I want to do at least 1 more time. Okay, Jessica, Margot, Nehemia, and then Alina, and I saw 1 more hand now, maybe. Okay, okay.
Hi. Okay. Me?
Yeah, Jessica.
Shabbat shalom. Hello.
Hi, Jessica. Shabbat shalom. Good to see you.
So I'm seeing this other page up now, but I'm thinking about what we just read.
Yeah,
And
I'm gonna stop my share screen.
okay, I wonder if the one thing is I was going to say the same thing that you already said about what your Havruta said about not stopping to mourn. That what can happen to grief when we don't feel it is it can fester and become rage, and when we don't take the time for it. But I also want to infuse this with compassion, because there doesn't seem to be that much compassion happening in this story. First of all, having worked with refugees, I know that the refugees who come from Afghanistan and then are in terrible, terrible conditions in wherever they land, they don't forget that they're now free and they're now safe from the threat of death, but they're also having human problems like thirst that can make them miserable, and there's not compassion for them, and there's not compassion for Moshe for using his rage, which could be his festered grief, to hit the rock. Instead, he's told he can't go forward. So I wonder if this has trickled down to the modern time in my own life of my own lack of compassion around imperfection. Like, I can't make a mistake or I'll get, punish myself. So I
Wow,
just want to
Jessica,
bring
so
that
much. Beautiful, beautiful. So I want to say 2 things. I love that almost as like a commentary that you're writing right now in 2022, your commentary is the one of infusing compassion, right? And I will say that maybe the quote unquote punishment, the way I often see punishments in the Torah, is as natural consequences. Like, because Moshe hit the rock, it's just a sign that he could not go into the next stage of development. It's also very human. Like, we all when we die, we look at a promise that we cannot enter. So just a little reframe. Okay, but thank you, Jessica. Beautiful. And so important to surround not only the people with compassion, but Moshe, Aaron, and even God. And oneself. And finally oneself. Thank you. Okay, Margot Miriam.
Good morning, Shabbat Shalom.
Miriam, you're with us.
I know. I've heard my name called so many times. I put this in the chat, but I wanted to practice it kind of out loud. So lots of time in, for example, in Pirkei Avot, Torah is likened to water. For example, you should be like a tree planted by the water. Right. Miriam is water. Miriam's well follows them. Maryam has the yam in it. It has water in it. And love is likened to water. Many waters cannot quench this love of ours. So Miriam equals water, equals love, equals Torah. And Torah is the blueprint for creation. And now we're lacking, we have this trio. We have Miriam, Moses, and Aaron. And if you'll forgive me just follow me for a minute. Miriam equals chesed, love. Moshe equals gvura. Right. Aaron equals tiferet. Okay, now we're lacking the chesed.
Please, yes. Miriam, translate your terms.
Oh, sorry.
Go back and translate your terms.
So I thought I was, but I guess I wasn't. So Miriam equals chesed is loving kindness. Moshe equals strength And between them is Aharon, Tiferet, beauty, harmony between the two of them. Aharon is about to die. Now Moses doesn't have Miriam, he didn't mourn for her. And so the strength, the hitting overwhelms, the balance is lost without this flowing water, which is Torah, which is love. And so he reverts to what he was before when he killed the taskmasters. His strength overwhelms his chesed.
So strength becomes violence without the war.
Strength becomes violence without that balancing.
I don't think.
And I would say strength becomes not strength.
And
I would agree. Thank you.
English.
Dibarti.
Aaron, Margot Miriam was saying was Tiferet.
Right.
Which is what in English?
Balance and
Like,
harmony.
like in the Kabbalistic tree of this Sefirot, you have Chesed, you have Gevurah, and between them, combining the two, you have Tiferet.
And that
So
is
Tiferet is
balance.
harmony, balance, yes.
Splendor, beauty.
Yeah. Okay, Nehemiah. Nehemiah and then Alina.
שבת שלום קהילה קדושה ורבי. חנוך אדם על פי דרכו. Teach a person according to where he is. The entire Torah and all the scriptures of all tradition are written for people who are in dualistic state. You have to go deep into the Kabbalah to get what it's really there, and you have to go deep not in your mind, but in your heart to merge. I didn't merge yet, but I've been with people who merge. And Jesus came out of my body, and he was full of light, and he wasn't suffering, and he didn't say, God, why did you forsake me? And a year later, my teacher in India usually was very careful with the way he spoke about religion. He said he couldn't have said it. People who didn't understand him, because when you merge with God, you are happy even if you are suffering physically. And the same is true for Moses. Moses reached union with God, and I have to study the Kabbalah to find it fully. But I'm sure in the Zohar, all the masters that transmitted that were unified with God, they won't complain. That's the language that they give us, because that's where we are now to teach us in our own way. Dibarti.
Second straight, man. Second straight. Please.
Shamati Nehemiah. Toda rabah. Okay, Alina. Alina, will you come here?
I don't know if it's worthy of this, but
I'm sure you are worthy.
I have always had a problem with the whole thing. First of all, you hit a rock, you don't necessarily get water. So to me, it's humans are writing this. So it feels like the people are making a moralistic statement about this. And also why we think only negatively about Moses had done his work. He was liberated. It's not that if you can't go, it's that you don't have to go. Now it's the people have to take responsibility.
Nice. Oh, beautiful. And you've set me up beautifully for our last text. Okay, so two things, Alina. So thank you. Okay. So second, Alina saying perhaps Moshe is released from this burden of leadership that we started off saying he was ambivalent about. Love that, Alina. Wow. Okay. Number one. What was number one?
Number three.
But it's written by people.
It's written by people. Okay, so that's what I want to say. Okay, so okay, of course it's written by
Not
people.
according to.
Hold on. Okay, written by people, perhaps inspired by God, perhaps direct revelation through people. Who knows? But what is it really saying? Like what humanly is it sort of expressing to us? And if you think about death and loss, right, and the sort of the unbearable lightness of being, I never read that book, but I love the title. It's like, how can we tolerate, right, how temporal and how ephemeral we are? So of course, Moshe doesn't want to speak at that moment of grief. He wants something, hard, physical, a rock hitting, right? Like, I can't take how mortal I am. So I would say, Lena, that humanly, perhaps that's where we're going here. How unbearable loss is, and losing the people.
But maybe he's saying, I can't take how lightness of being I am. I can't locate myself as a mortal without hitting the rock.
Ooh, nice. So Tony's saying, something about hitting the rock is helping Moshe locate at that
To
moment
ground
and,
himself.
and ground himself. And this relates to Jessica's point about compassion. Okay, I'm taking one more comment in Maryland, and then I'm going to end with one more text. I'm sorry, Jay, I'm not taking return. Okay, Maryland.
Yeah, hi. Very briefly, just a question more. I'm really struck by the Moses Aaron duo that I've never been struck by before. That and
Say struck.
I'm struck twice actually. And there's this even thing about striking the rock twice. Like they don't even strike and notice Freudian slip, I said they don't even strike it once. They strike it twice. But it's even ambivalent who said. It's Moses and Aaron are standing there, and then he says, almost as though they're one. And then I think when God is talking, is it in the plural that God says, you plural did this and you plural will not lead the people?
Yes.
So that it's really interesting because, everything I've ever heard is always Moses was punished, Moses. But it sort of looks like they're a unit there, which I don't know if any,
yeah, no, that's
you have any comment about
I
that.
agree it gets lost. I don't have a lot to say about it, but I think that fact gets lost. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to, Paul, make a quick comment as I share my screen. I'm sorry, Mara, I'm going to think about what you said. If I have something to say, I will communicate with you directly. Okay. Okay, Paul.
So it occurred to me very
Here,
quickly.
can you come here?
It occurred to me quickly that Moses struck the rock twice in mourning Miriam and Aaron. And the two strikes were in honor of his siblings. And
even though Aaron didn't die yet.
Moses anticipates Aaron's death.
Okay, nice.
And he is saying to God, take me too, because
Nice.
we're a triumvirate.
Wow. Bravo.
So Moshe wants exit. And Alina's saying the exit is the gift, not the punishment. Whoa. Okay, I've been totally turned around on reading these texts today by so many of the comments in the room and on Zoom. Wow. So thank you, everybody. Okay, one more, which I think is really sort of a beautiful cap to what we've been studying. Okay, so in the next chapter, right? We're gonna go with here. Okay, here. Okay, so they're traveling here and there, some interesting place names that we're not going to go into. But then they go Misham Be'era, right? So Miriam's Be'er. Be'era is a place which means well. He ha-be'er asher amar Adonai Moshe esofer ha'am ve'etneh lahem mayim. So it's okay. So which is the well where Adonai said to Moshe, assemble the people that I may give them water. So that seems to be referring to the text we just looked at. So at the Be'er, something really interesting happens. Az Yashir Yisrael, Ketashira Hazot, Ali Be'er Anula. Remember we looked at Exodus 15 before. So the song starts with Az Yashir Moshe B'nai Yisrael, Ketashira Hazot. So then Yisrael sings a song saying, Ali Be'er, rise up, O well, Anula, not sing to it, answer her. So who are they answering? Who are they asking, the community to answer? So my theory is Miriam, answer Miriam. So let's look at the next verse. Be'er chafru hasarim, the well which the chieftains dug. Karuha nedivei ha'am b'mechokek b'mishkan notam, which the nobles of the people started with maces with their own staff. Umi midbar matana, and from midbar they went to matana. So we're continuing with our journeys now. So what it looks like is happening here, and kind of cryptic, maybe more ancient language in the Torah, because it's really kind of strange language. that the chieftains are digging a well in the wake of Miriam's death, and they're using perhaps their own staffs.
Their own what?
Their own staffs. So what it looks like to me is that in the wake of Miriam's death, the community is finally taking responsibility for providing water for themselves.
Wow.
So once somebody dies, right, how do we access the flow of who they were and their presence were
Taking up your own staff.
in their life? And, you know, as I say that, I think about my dear friend here, Robin Aronson, who just lost her mother and is in the week of Shiva, talking about grieving rituals, and experiencing that loss of flow. So, you know, I think it's worth thinking for all of us what we grieve, when we grieve it, what we haven't grieved, you know, what our rage says about grief. And there's another text, there is some more text, wonderful Midrashic texts, which I urge you to read. And then there's something here about gendered leadership. And my thesis or my theory about Miriam's leadership is that it's really a kind of subtle subterranean leadership. Subtle subterranean. You know, I start off by saying, you know, this is, you know, Miriam's watery leadership. There's so much about her name that's encoded in Torah, right? And played like Mayim, Mara, bitterness, Marim, and then Morim. You know, perhaps Miriam's sort of contribution to the community came from a less explicit leadership than Moses, more implicit, more subtle. I wish this was a question, what?
Of the earth.
Of the earth, perhaps, or of the water. I wish we had a time to explore that whole question, but I leave it for you to think about. I need to go to services now, and I'm going to assign the share. I'm going to make Jay the host, so you can continue the conversation. Okay. Thank you.
Every D.
Okay, so okay, wait, I have to let me see if I can make Jay. Jay, here we go.
Wow.
I think you have to go to me as a participant.
Yeah,
Call on yourself first.
Something's not working here. Hold on.
I think you have to get me as a participant and
I
then
know, I go to participants and then I see more. Okay. Make host. Okay, that worked. Change host. Okay. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Maybe see you in services. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Toda rabba.
Shabbos.
okay, here we are in the after party. So I guess Marilyn was waiting to say something in the main room. Marilyn, do you still want to speak? Because I didn't realize I was going to use up my one slot by correcting the flow of the Jordan, but so be it. So let me just say in the chat, I think in a way we also buried the lead, because I think for me the real interesting the metamorphosis of the staff from being a weapon to being almost a prop, animistic prop, to then being a mantle of leadership, and the role, and also the role from power to language, because in that last time he's explicitly told, take the staff as a sign of authority and then go and speak to the rock. So language in essence is also replacing even or critical to power. And then at the end, the staff becomes a tool because it's being used to dig the wells. So I think the whole notion of how we work with a symbol of power and how we add to it in terms of language, pragmatics, et cetera, is something worth to think about.
I have a random comment that may be more interesting to me than others. I used to be a hydrogeologist in my working life. And so I have supervised the construction of many, many wells. And the thought of creating a well with a staff, oh my God, that is some serious backbreaking labor. You think about what the ancient people faced, whereas how we would get a well today. Today, we've got these gigantic machines that go out and auger it for us. And man, I'm struck by that just because I've been around so many drilling rigs. DeBarty.
So Beth, what do you think about there being a well in a lake? As a hydrologist.
You wouldn't get a well in a lake, but you do get springs that occur in lakes. For example, I'm not sure where it is. It's somewhere in the Near East, like maybe off of Ethiopia. There are actually freshwater springs that come up in the bay, and people knew they were there and they went and harvested them. They would take goatskin bags and they would dive down almost the way a pearl diver dives down deep in the water, and they would capture the fresh water from the salt water and bring it back up so they'd have potable water. You wouldn't have a well bore per se, but you could have these upwelling of springs. They exist. In fact, there's some here in Ohio where there are saltwater springs that come up in our freshwater lakes and rivers. Anyway, that's all I have to say about wells now.
The Kinneret is 700 feet below sea level.
Okay, I put in the chat I looked it up. It does go north to south. It goes from the Hermon down to the Dead Sea, flowing north to south. But let's not debate that too much, but that just happens to be a fact. Sorry. Marilyn, you wanted to speak.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, my daughter's very involved in ecological economy, etc. And I was thinking about all this stuff about whether, there's been these discussions whether water and rivers actually have rights. And now they're discussing about before you take something from the rainforest, should you ask permission first before you do it? So I'm wondering, like, if this whole story could be used as stop hitting the rock, stop controlling nature that way, and why don't you speak to nature like speaking to the well and saying, is it okay? Do you want to give me your water? So this is the first time I just sort of thought about it in that sense, that maybe it's time for a big switch to go back to maybe our relationship, the interconnectedness of us and nature.
I think it's even on your property in Toronto, you can't just go ahead and chop down a tree.
I think in our tradition, we have a bit of a precedent for this, and that is when Shochet slaughters an animal. There's, I don't know what the exact wording is, but there's some kind of prayer that said, thanking God for the life of the animal and, the giving of food to us. So we do have a little bit of a precedent in this invocation before taking something.
Yeah, just reading a bylaw in Toronto, significant trees on private property or city streets are protected under municipal code, known as the Tree Protection Bylaw. If you intend to injure or destroy, remove a protected tree, you must obtain a permit. Kathy Lynn, you're just...
Shabbat shalom. Okay, I have a couple things. I can't see you, so give me a sec. Yeah, so this I think I heard from Aviva Zornberg. It's in regard to Moshe and the striking of the Matzah, and I think it was referred to a bit in the session. But, you know, he had this rage issue, right? And, you know, he had this whole arc of a life to transform this personal space for him, right? And when it came time for him to do something other than rage, he wasn't able to. He wasn't able to do the other, you know, he didn't have the will to be able to do that. That's the first. And I think the second thing was also referred to, which is God was now trying to usher the people through a different way, not of threatening and punishing, you know, and that's why it was so important for Moshe in that moment to speak to the rock, you know, to be gentle, to be kind, not to be rageful, because that's what they had experienced the whole, you know, basically the whole 40 years with God. I'm going to kill you. I'm not going to kill you. This was the moment for the people to see that there was another way and to bring that consciousness and awareness into the, you know, to embody that through Moshe. So it was like this really critical moment that got lost. And number 2 point, as you were saying, you know, the Kinneret of 700 feet or however many feet below sea level or meters. So what if that whole thing is a well, right? Like the whole of the Kinneret could be the source, right? And then finally, I'm thinking the mateh, which is so interesting. What was the mateh? You know, if you think of dowsing rods are still used to this day in some places to find water. What was the mateh? And then if we look at the Egyptian history with the mateh, there's something else to the mateh, I think, that we don't understand or know about, or information we have lost. That's all I got.
I see there's still people in the conference room. You may be having your own discussion, which is fine, but if you do want to join us, feel free. We're kind of just doing popcorn here, so feel free to contribute. Amy, just to clear it all up, I was just saying the Jordan River flows south from the Hermon to the Galilee to the Dead Sea, which is the lowest spot on earth. So that's all I was trying to say. So if in fact the well traveled to the Dead Sea from where they were to the Kinneret from where they were south of the Kinneret, it would have been going upstream, which is an interesting sort of yet another miracle, if that's the assertion. That's all I'm trying to say. And also it's interesting to me that in spite of the fact that Moshe violated God's instructions, the water still flowed. And that's kind of interesting, that did not stop the water from flowing. So that's also something to ponder, I think. Nehemiah?
Hey, I can say that I'm a Jordan expert because I was brought up near the Jordan and I learned to swim in the Jordan, and I dived in the Jordan, and I was born near the place where the three rivers confluence and meet the Jordan. So, yes. When we start, and people made the comment before, to be violent toward nature, which we do a lot these days, lose the contact, the humility towards Mother Earth, towards the water, towards not just the American Indian, before they killed the buffalo, they asked permission. When we lose this way, we start to lose balance. Climate change, everything. Society become controlled by the money, which I even want on to talk about because it will raise a lot of questions here. How big is the money controlling us this day, up to whatever it does? And everything is by the power and by the money, because we are not listening to our heart. We are listening to our power, to our might. So maybe in the story there's some hint to the place where this is somewhat a little bit lost. I don't know if it's Moses, because I consider Moses to be a realized being, but somewhere around they want to teach us something about when you come to ask the rock to give you a miracle and bring you water, ask it with humility. Don't hate it. twice. You don't need to. God gave you all the power. So subtle. You don't need to hit it twice. And Miriam, she even doesn't do anything. She just brings the water up. This is the power of the Shekhinah. Just bring the water up. And this is the way we have to learn the gentle way. Because the world is so full of violence and aggression between groups. I wouldn't even